At first, there was only silence, a plane climbing steadily into the summer skies of Greece, its silver body glinting against the morning sun. To the world below, it was just another ordinary flight. Routine, unremarkable, unthreatening. But inside, a creeping darkness was already taking hold. The passengers sat unaware, their breaths measured, their eyes heavy, their voices fading. A ghostly stillness was spreading through the cabin, unseen yet merciless. A silent thief stealing life in slow motion. And when the radios crackled with unanswered calls, the world would soon realize that Helios Airways Flight 522 had slipped into the realm of nightmares. Not with a crash, but with silence. Before we begin, if you find yourself drawn into these forgotten skies, where every story holds a lesson and every silence carries a voice, make sure to like this video, share it with those who search for truth, and subscribe so you never miss another lost lesson. The morning of August 14th, 2005 began like any other over the Aegean Sea. A stillness hung in the summer air, broken only by the distant hum of engines rising from Athens International Airport. At 9:07 a.m., a Boeing 737 belonging to Helios Airways lifted gracefully into the sky. To those watching from the ground, it was just another aircraft climbing through the blue, its white fuselage flashing in the sunlight as it ascended toward the heavens. Inside, 115 passengers and 6 crew members settled into their seats, fastening belts, unwrapping magazines, and preparing for the short flight to Prague. There was nothing unusual about the takeoff. No sign of the storm that lay hidden, waiting. In the cockpit, Captain Hans-Jürgen Merten, a seasoned German pilot, and First Officer Pompust, a young Cypriot co-pilot, spoke in calm, practiced tones. Their hands moved with quiet precision over the switches and dials, unaware of the trap that had been set long before the wheels even left the runway. The cabin, too, was calm. Children pressed their faces to the windows, watching the patchwork of sea and islands shrink below. Flight attendants moved gracefully down the aisles, their smiles rehearsed but genuine, their presence reassuring. To every passenger, this was nothing more than a routine journey, one more thread in the fabric of everyday life. But fate had already shifted course. Buried deep within the aircraft systems, a simple switch, overlooked and forgotten, was set to the wrong position. It was not dramatic, not explosive, not the sort of failure that tears metal apart. It was quite insidious. A mistake so small it could be missed by even the sharpest eyes, yet one with the power to unmake an entire flight. As the bowing climbed higher, oxygen thinned in the cabin, invisible, undetectable. A slow thief of consciousness. One by one, passengers began to feel the subtle weight pressing upon their chests. The creeping drowsiness that seemed almost harmless. A yawn here, a heavy eyelid there. Nothing alarming, yet every breath they took carried them closer to silence. Up front, the pilots were already hearing alarms. Warning lights flickered. Strange sounds filled the cockpit, but the puzzle before them was one they could not solve in time. And while the morning sky remained deceptively calm, voices inside the aircraft were already beginning to fade. The first signs of trouble came not with fire or turbulence, but with whispers of confusion. In the cockpit, warning horns echoed, shrill and relentless, demanding attention. A piercing sound filled the confined space, blurring thought, distorting reason. The pilots searched their instruments, eyes darting from panel to panel, hands moving in urgent repetition. But the riddle before them was merciless. A pressurization system left in manual mode, its silent betrayal hidden behind the alarms. Outside, the summer sky remained perfect, a cruel contrast to the chaos unfolding within. Radios crackled with unanswered calls as air traffic controllers in Athens repeated their messages. Helios 522, do you copy? The words stretched into the void, reaching for a voice that was already slipping away. Silence was the reply. Back in the cabin, the passengers felt it too. The strange heaviness pressing down on their lungs, the dull ache of headaches forming. Confusion settling over the rows like a shadow. Some tried to stay awake, to fight the wave of sleepiness washing over them. Others surrendered without knowing why, slumping in their seats, drifting into unconsciousness. The flight attendants, trained for emergencies, struggled to remain upright, their movements unsteady, their strength dissolving. They reached for masks that never fell, for systems designed to protect but left useless by the cruel error. One by one, they too succumbed, their bodies giving in to the invisible thief that filled the cabin with silence. And then came the voices. Distant, fading, desperate. Calls from the cockpit that grew weaker, fractured by confusion and the creeping fog of hypoxia. Captain Merton's words were disjointed, searching for meaning in alarms he no longer fully understood. First Officer Charalambas pressed buttons, transmitted messages, but the clarity was gone. The mind, starved of oxygen, becomes a maze of half-formed thoughts and fading awareness. Controllers on the ground heard fragments, broken words carried across the airwaves. They did not know it then, but they were listening to the voices of men already on the edge of unconsciousness. Each second stretched, each unanswered call deepened the dread, and then silence. No more responses. No more voices. Just a steady aircraft cutting through the clear morning sky. A ghost ship in the air, its passengers and crews slipping further away from the world below. Inside the cabin, time no longer moved as it should. Rows of passengers sat in eerie stillness, their bodies motionless, their faces pale against the dim glow of overhead lights. The air was thin, heavy with silence. This was no longer a living flight, but a vessel adrift in the skies. A silent chamber where dreams had overtaken waking breath. Children who had once pressed their noses to the glass now slumped in their seats, their small hands limp against armrests. Mothers leaned sideways, eyes closed as though in restless sleep. Businessmen, tourists, families, all surrendered to the same unseen force. 115 passengers. Frozen in time, caught in a quiet struggle they could not win. Through the aisles, the flight attendants lay where exhaustion claimed them, uniforms rumpled, trays abandoned mid-service. The laughter, the conversation, the movement of a living cabin, all erased. It was as though life itself had been switched off, leaving only the hum of engines carrying their still forms across the sky. At the front cockpit had fallen silent. Warning horns still echoed, sharp and merciless, but no hands reached to silence them anymore. The pilots sat slumped, their bodies still upright, but their consciousness gone, stolen by the thin air that crept unnoticed into their lungs. Their instruments glowed, indifferent. Their controls remained untouched, steady as the aircraft held its course on autopilot. Below, controllers stared at radar screens, watching the green dot that represented Helios 522. It flew with impossible calm, maintaining altitude, following its programmed path as though nothing was wrong. But every unanswered call, every attempt met with silence, confirmed what no one dared to believe. A flight full of people was still airborne, but no one inside was truly there. And yet, within this sea of stillness, one breath still fought against the silence. In the cabin, a lone man stirred. Flight attendant Andreas Pro. His training, his will, his sheer instinct pulled him back from the edge where so many had already fallen. Half-conscious, his mind clouded but his resolve intact, he clawed against the fog of hypoxia. In that moment, he became the last living voice aboard Helios 522. The cabin was empty. Yet within its silence, a flicker of resistance remained. A fragile heartbeat against the vast, indifferent sky. The aircraft drifted above Greece for hours, a ghostly figure tracing silent circles in the sky. To those on the ground, it was an enigma. A passenger jet that answered no calls, that flew with precision yet carried only silence. Fighter jets were dispatched, roaring into the blue horizon to meet the wandering plane. As they drew alongside, their pilots peered into the cabin through small windows. And what they saw chilled them. Rows of motionless figures. Heads slumped, bodies frozen in unnatural stillness. The cabin was lifeless, its silence visible even through the glass. The cockpit, too, appeared abandoned. The captain and first officer unmoving, their forms stiff under the pale light. But then, a flicker of movement caught the fighter pilot's eye. A figure entered the cockpit. It was not the captain, not the co-pilot. It was a flight attendant, Andreas Brother Mo, the last conscious soul aboard. With an oxygen mask pressed to his face, he fought to take control of the jet. His steps were heavy, his body weakened by hours of thin air, yet determination guided him. He sat in the captain's seat, his hands trembling as they reached for the controls. The fighter pilot watching from outside would later recall the sight. One man, alone against the impossible, wrestling with fate in a cockpit meant for two. Inside, alarm still screamed. Warning lights glared. The fuel gauges sank lower with every passing minute. Andreas tried to speak, his voice breaking through the radio in a final, desperate transmission, but the words were fragmented, nearly lost in static. He was weak, his strength fading. Still, he fought. He tried to keep the jet alive, to save those already gone, to bring the ghost flight back to Earth. But time was merciless. The fuel tanks drained, and the engines began to cough. One by one, their roar faltering into silence. The aircraft shuddered as the first engine failed. Then the second, its power bleeding away. Gravity reached up, unrelenting, pulling the silver body down from the skies. Andreas remained at the controls, fighting until the final breath. Fighter pilots watched helplessly as Helios Airways Flight 5022, once a proud bird of the skies, began its fatal descent. A silent giant, falling toward the hills of Greece. The end was inevitable. Yet even in those final moments, one man had stood against the darkness, carrying the weight of an entire flight upon his shoulders. At 12:04 p.m., after nearly 3 hours in the sky, Helios Airways Flight 52 met the Earth. The aircraft struck the hills near Grammatico, its steel frame tearing through the dry Greek soil, a fireball rising into the silent sky. The ghost flight had ended, its long journey collapsing into a single moment of destruction. 121 souls were gone, families broken, a nation left in mourning, and a mystery that was, in truth, a mistake, too small, too human to believe. In the wreckage, investigators pieced together the story that silence had concealed. A pressurization switch, left in the wrong setting after maintenance. A failure to recognize the warnings that followed. Hypoxia, the invisible killer, seeping into every breath, erasing thought, stealing strength, and silencing voices. It was not sabotage, not terror, not a storm. It was human error, simple yet devastating. But tragedy does not fade quietly. The questions linger. How could one oversight bring down a plane? How could so many lives be lost to something so small? And why did it take one lone flight attendant, fighting until his final breath, to carry the weight of what no one else could? The story of Flight 522 is not just about the fragility of machines, but about the fragility of human memory. How easily lessons are forgotten, how quickly procedures become routine, how silence creeps in when vigilance fades. Yet it is also a story of courage, for in its final moments, when all seemed lost, one man rose against the inevitable. Andreas Prodromo, his body weak, breath shallow, tried to wrestle hope from despair. He could not save the flight, but he gave it dignity. Today, the hills of Grammatico remain quiet. The wreckage has long been cleared, the scars of fire healed by time, but in the skies above, the echo remains. A reminder that every switch matters, every alarm has meaning, and that silence in the air is never just silence. Flight 522 will forever be remembered not only as the ghost flight of Helios Airways, but as a haunting lesson carved into the history of aviation. A whisper carried on the wind, urging us never to forget.